Somewhere in a laptop that shipped this quarter, there may be a memory chip stamped with the mark of a Chinese fabrication facility. Or there may not be, and that uncertainty is exactly where this argument lives. The bullish claim is that CXMT, the state-backed Chinese memory producer based in Hefei, has reached a price point and a specification tier that makes Western original equipment manufacturers quietly curious about qualifying a second source. The skeptical counterclaim is that curiosity is not a purchase order, and the legal, reputational, and technical walls between a competitive sample and an actual bill of materials are high enough that Micron's position in Western supply chains is considerably safer than the loudest headlines suggest. 4 rounds decide which side is right, and the verdict lands somewhere neither side wants to admit. The restriction that was supposed to freeze Chinese memory out of Western supply chains, the export controls that cut CXMT off from the most advanced manufacturing tooling, instead sharpened its cost position in the mainstream double data rate 4 and low-power double data rate 4 tiers that still constitute the bulk of the global laptop market by unit count. The question is whether that cost position can clear the compliance, qualification, and reputational barriers that stand between a competitive die and a design win. That contest is the whole story. A single double data rate 4 chip, produced at CXMT's Hefei facility, travels through these 4 rounds as the protagonist. In round 1, it is a cost line on a procurement spreadsheet. In round 2, it is a compliance liability on a legal team's desk. In round 3, it is a sample on a validation bench. In round 4, it is a die inside a module that asks nobody for permission. The verdict names what it actually is at the end of that journey. Those 4 rounds run in order, and the evidence escalates toward the one that matters most. Round 1 is about price and the incentive it creates. Double data rate 4 memory is one of the most commoditized inputs in consumer electronics. Original equipment manufacturers do not build loyalty to their memory suppliers the way they build loyalty to platform partners. They build qualification lists and then play those lists against each other every quarter. Industry observers covering the Asian component market have reported that CXMT has been pricing its double data rate 4 modules at a meaningful discount to the prevailing spot prices offered by Micron, Samsung, and SK Hynix. Some estimates place that gap in the double-digit percentage range, though no independent audit of these transactions exists and no confirmed purchase orders have been published. The figure is an estimate, not a documented ledger entry. For an original equipment manufacturer assembling tens of millions of laptops annually, even a modest per-unit saving on a component that appears in every single device is not a rounding error in the financial model. It is a margin recapture event large enough to appear in a quarterly earnings bridge. The bullish argument here is not ideological, it is arithmetic. When a second source offers a part that meets specification at a meaningfully lower price, the procurement teams at major manufacturers are paid to evaluate that option. That is their job description, and the incentive structure has not changed. The counterclaim is that the savings calculation is real only if the total cost of adoption is confined to the unit price. It is not. Qualifying a new memory supplier for a major original equipment manufacturer program involves engineering validation cycles that run for months, not weeks. It involves yield consistency data across multiple production lots. It involves post-sale warranty exposure if field failure rates diverge from the specification the module was qualified against. Micron's incumbency is not purely brand preference. It is the accumulated result of those qualification investments already having been made and paid for. A procurement team that switches to a new supplier is not simply pocketing a discount. It is spending qualification capital that carries real engineering and legal costs. And it is doing so with a producer whose consistency across sustained high-volume production runs has not been independently verified at scale. The structural incentive is real and supported by decades of precedent. The pattern of Taiwanese and South Korean original equipment manufacturers qualifying second-source suppliers specifically to extract price concessions from incumbents is a playbook older than the modern semiconductor era. What is not established is whether CXMT's discount is durable across multiple quarters, or whether it compresses as the facility's own cost base rises under the weight of capital depreciation on newly installed equipment. The company's own announcements describe capacity expansion at Hefei, which implies unit cost dilution over time. But the trajectory of that cost curve is an analyst estimate, not a confirmed disclosure. Round 1 goes narrowly to the bullish side. The incentive is structural. The arithmetic is real. But that word narrowly carries weight. The discount has to prove durable, and the qualification cost has to be recoverable for the math to close at the scale the bullish case requires. And neither condition is confirmed by public data. Round 2 is about risk and where it actually lands. The bullish case on sanctions exposure is not that the risk is absent. It is that the risk is manageable, and that, for a specific subset of manufacturers, it is already being managed. CXMT does not appear, as of the most recent available public records, on the United States Entity List. That distinction matters enormously in procurement compliance. A component sourced from a company that has not been formally designated is not automatically a sanctions violation. For most buyers who are not domiciled in the United States, it is a business decision carrying reputational risk and future policy risk. But it is not, today, a current legal prohibition. The majority of the global laptop market is assembled in China and Taiwan, and in those jurisdictions, the compliance calculus differs substantially from what a buyer with United States exposure faces. For a Taiwanese original design manufacturer selling primarily into non-Western markets, the risk profile of qualifying CXMT is meaningfully different from what the phrase China chip implies to an audience thinking about Silicon Valley procurement meetings. The counterclaim is that entity list status is a floor, not a ceiling. The United States government has demonstrated repeatedly that it expands export controls retroactively, and that supply chains audited after the fact can expose companies to penalty even for transactions that appeared lawful at the time they were executed. For any manufacturer with significant United States revenue, United States investor exposure, or United States government procurement contracts, the operative question is not what the current rule says. It is what the rule will say in 18 months when an audit covers the procurement decisions being made today. Beyond legal risk, there is customer risk. Major enterprise buyers and government procurement offices in the United States and Europe have begun requiring supply chain attestations that specifically address Chinese origin components. A disclosed design win involving CXMT in a product line that serves those customers is a contract risk, not merely a headline risk, and the legal exposure does not wait for the regulation to formally expand. The practical split here tracks geography and customer mix more precisely than the framing of Western laptop allows. That phrase is doing a significant amount of hidden work. It conflates a consumer notebook sold in China under a brand that has no United States federal contracts with a commercial workstation sold to a government agency in Washington. And the risk profiles of those two devices are not comparable. The skeptics are correct that for the specific, highly visible, heavily scrutinized slice of the original equipment manufacturer market, the one that generates the most prominent revenue and faces the most rigorous supply chain auditing, the compliance cost is prohibitive in practice, not just on paper. The bullish side is correct that this is not the whole market. Round 2 goes to the skeptics, but on a genuine split. For manufacturers with heavy United States and Western enterprise exposure, the risk is real and the compliance cost is prohibitive today. For manufacturers whose customer base sits predominantly outside those jurisdictions, the risk is lower than the framing implies. The round scores for the skeptics because the original question specifies Western laptops, and that word does the limiting work that matters. Round 3 is about technical qualification, and this is where the supply chain architecture becomes the decisive variable. The bullish case rests on the specific tier where CXMT is actually competing. This is not a contest over high-bandwidth memory stacks for artificial intelligence accelerators or low-power double data rate 5 for flagship mobile devices. Those are tiers where Micron, Samsung, and SK Hynix hold genuine generational process advantages, and where most analysts estimate CXMT's process maturity lags the frontier by approximately 2 to 3 generations. Though the company's own roadmap claims a narrowing trajectory, an independent verification of either figure is limited. The contest is in double data rate 4 and low-power double data rate 4, established, mature, high-volume tiers where the performance and power specifications are well understood. The validation test suites are standardized, and CXMT's reported process maturity is close enough to the required node to make qualification plausible rather than aspirational. The company's own claim is that its double data rate for production meets industry standard timing and density specifications. No independent benchmark has fully confirmed this across multiple production lots, but no public report has found systematic failure at the die level either. The counterclaim is that passing a datasheet specification and passing an original equipment manufacturer qualification are different events, separated by a significant body of additional work. Qualification for dynamic random access memory at a major manufacturer involves demonstrating consistency across thermal cycling, voltage margin stress, and multi-thousand-hour reliability projections. It involves the supplier's ability to provide documentation, lot traceability, and process change notification protocols that a major quality management system requires. CXMT is a relatively young high-volume memory producer, and the institutional knowledge required to run a qualification program at the depth that a Tier 1 manufacturer expects, the failure mode libraries, the field return databases, the procedural discipline of notifying customers before a process change, takes years to accumulate. A die may meet specification on a single sample test. Whether it meets specification across the variants of a sustained production ramp is a different question, and it is the question that determines whether it survives a Tier 1 validation program. The concrete pathway the bullish argument tracks is structural. CXMT does not need to pass qualification directly at the named Tier 1 manufacturer. It needs to pass qualification at a module maker, a Tier 2 supplier that packages memory, dies into small outline memory modules or soldered-on packages, and sells those to the original equipment manufacturer under the module maker's own brand. That intermediate step insulates the brand name manufacturer from direct engagement with CXMT and shifts the qualification burden to the module maker, who operates with more flexibility on die sourcing. Reports from Component Industry Press suggest this pathway is active in the personal computer memory module market across Asia, though which specific module brands are sourcing CXMT dies is not independently confirmed by audited supply chain data. The chip's journey from a Hefe wafer to a finished device does not require a direct Tier 1 design win. It may require only that a module maker qualifies the die, and that the original equipment manufacturer qualifies the module without conducting a deep audit of the die's wafer origin. That is a meaningfully lower bar than direct qualification, and it is the bar that may already be clearing. Round 3 is a draw that leans bullish at the module tier and skeptical at the brand name manufacturer tier. CXMT does not need to win a direct design win at a named original equipment manufacturer to reach a finished laptop. It needs to win a module maker's die sourcing decision. That path is structurally plausible and appears to be in early motion. Whether the finished device satisfies any meaningful definition of passing original equipment manufacturer qualification depends entirely on how much transparency the brand name buyer is actually requiring from its module suppliers. And that requirement varies significantly by company, by product line, and by customer. Round 4 is about the quiet channel, and it is the round where the most honest answer lives. The gray label module market is not a fringe phenomenon in the personal computer memory supply chain. It is a structural feature of it. Memory modules sold under generic or white label brand names, particularly in the consumer and value segments, have historically served as the absorption channel for commodity memory dies that do not carry a major brand's margin expectations. In this channel, the die's origin is often disclosed only in the module maker's internal documentation, not on the label that the original equipment manufacturer's receiving doc sees. Reports from Asian component distributors suggest CXMT-sourced modules are circulating in this channel, particularly in markets where price pressure on consumer personal computers is most acute. The bullish argument at this point is not that a large Western brand has issued a purchase order with CXMT's corporate name on the line item. The bullish argument is that the chip may already be in devices that reach consumers, moving through channels where origin traceability is not the question being asked. The counterclaim is that the gray label channel argument proves too much if it is used to establish broad original equipment manufacturer adoption. The fact that a die may appear in an unbranded module that ends up in a low-cost consumer device somewhere in a regional market is a substantially different claim from the statement that Western original equipment manufacturers are adopting CXMT memory. The latter implies a procurement decision made at the brand level, with the legal accountability and reputational consequence that attach to brand-level decisions. What the gray channel actually demonstrates is that CXMT memory can enter devices without a brand-level decision ever being made. which also means it enters without the warranty backstop, the supply chain accountability, and the quality management oversight that define what adoption means in any rigorous sense. The gray channel is not evidence of adoption. It is evidence of permeation at the commodity tier. Those are different claims, and conflating them produces both the most alarming version of the story and the most dismissive rebuttal, neither of which is accurate. The gray label channel functions less like a formal door and more like a receiving bay that nobody inspects on every shift. Goods arrive, they are integrated. Their origin is not the question asked at point of intake. This is consistent with how every cost-competitive memory producer has historically gained its first volume in the personal computer market, not by winning a Tier 1 qualification program with a name brand, but by being cheap enough that module makers absorb the die without asking the question that would make the answer complicated. The relevant question for the verdict is whether this constitutes a Western laptop shipping with Chinese memory inside it. On the strictest reading, the answer depends on whether the device is sold under a brand that anyone would call Western, and at the low-cost consumer tier in Asian markets, the brand on the lid may be neither Western nor Tier 1 by any conventional definition. On a looser reading, if a device ships to a Western consumer and the module inside carries a CXMT die, the chip is in a Western market laptop regardless of what the original equipment manufacturer's procurement office believes about its own supply chain. Round 4 goes to the bullish side on the narrow factual question. CXMT memory may already be present in devices that reach Western consumers through indirect paths. It goes to the skeptics on the substantive question. A die in a gray label module is not a design win, and treating them as equivalent is the analytical error that produces both the loudest headlines and the most dismissive rebuttals. The decisive insight across all 4 rounds is not about Micron's technology lead or CXMT's price discount considered in isolation. It is about where in the supply chain the origin question gets asked, who is responsible for asking it, and whether the structure of the supply chain allows it to go unasked entirely. Direct Tier 1 qualification of a CXMT die at a named original equipment manufacturer requires the manufacturer to conduct due diligence that surfaces the die's origin and then formally accept the legal and reputational consequences of that origin. That is a high bar, and the skeptics are correct that most major Western manufacturers with significant United States revenue are not clearing it today. The module tier operates under different rules. When an original equipment manufacturer qualifies a module from a Taiwanese or Korean module maker, it is typically qualifying the module's electrical performance, not conducting a wafer-origin audit of the die inside the package. CXMT's pathway into Western market devices does not run through a procurement meeting at a name brand. It runs through a module maker's die sourcing decision, which is a transaction that is more opaque, less scrutinized, and already in motion according to available industry reporting. The export control architecture that was designed to close the direct path has, in practice, redirected the flow to a tier where the same cost pressure operates, but the accountability is diffuse and the paper trail is incomplete. Round 3, which should have closed the argument with a clean technical verdict, instead redirected it to a level of the supply chain where the operative question is not, does CXMT pass qualification, but qualification of what component, at what tier, and by whom. 3 conditions could falsify the verdict. First, procurement teams at major Western original equipment manufacturers may in fact audit module-level die sourcing with enough rigor to make the module tier pathway as closed as the Tier 1 direct pathway. This claim is well documented for direct procurement decisions. It is not well documented for module-level sourcing, where the die origin is frequently several supply chain layers removed from the brand's direct supplier relationship. The loading dock, as described, is not the front office. Second, CXMT's process consistency at production scale has not been independently confirmed, which means the entire technical adoption argument ultimately rests on company claims and preliminary trade press reports. This is the single most significant evidentiary gap in the bullish case. Every adoption argument depends on whether CXMT's double data rate for production maintains specification across the variants of a high-volume ramp. If field return rates on CXMT-sourced modules diverge from expected levels, the module tier pathway closes quickly, and the cost advantage becomes a liability. Third, the regulatory environment is not static. The bullish case implicitly assumes the current posture towards CXMT persists long enough for the volume ramp to become entrenched. The pattern of United States export control expansions following commercial traction rather than preceding it suggests that the controls are more likely to follow a successful CXMT market entry than to prevent one. An original equipment manufacturer or module maker whose sourcing decisions look defensible today may find that the same decisions look different in retrospect when reviewed under a revised regulatory framework 2 years from now. That is a brittleness of a specific kind, not a thermal limit or a yield fragility, but the instability of a cost advantage that depends on a regulatory classification the supplier cannot control. The synthesis, the verdict holds, but with lower confidence than either side of this debate typically acknowledges. CXMT's pathway into Western market devices through the module tier is structurally plausible, and by available reporting, it is already in early motion at limited volume. It holds because the module tier pathway is real, the cost incentive is real, and the gray channel is a documented structural feature of the market. It holds with lower confidence because the 3 conditions that would falsify it, process inconsistency at scale, rigorous module-level auditing by original equipment manufacturers, or regulatory expansion covering CXMT, are all live possibilities rather than closed questions. None of them have been definitively resolved, and the bullish case cannot be fully adjudicated without the independent production data that does not yet exist in the public record. The analyst's ruling is this: CXMT memory is not winning. Name design wins at major Western original equipment manufacturers, in the way the most aggressive framing implies. Micron's position in the qualified supplier lists of the major commercial and enterprise original equipment manufacturer programs is not under immediate threat at the Tier 1 level. The skeptics who point to compliance barriers, qualification maturity gaps, and reputational exposure are describing real obstacles, not invented ones. But the question was never solely about Tier 1 design wins. The question was whether a Western laptop would ship with Chinese memory inside it. At the module tier, in the value and consumer segments, through gray label channels where origin traceability is diffuse and the questions are not being asked, the answer is possibly already, in limited volume, through pathways that no procurement team at a major name brand has formally approved and that few have formally investigated. That is not a technology triumph for China's semiconductor program. It is a supply chain permeation, a more mundane phenomenon, less dramatic than the headlines, more consequential than the dismissals, and fully consistent with how every cost-competitive commodity component has historically entered markets that initially resisted it. Micron's actual risk from CXMT is not, today, direct design win displacement at flagship programs. It is gradual price floor compression at the commodity tier that may, over multiple product generations, force margin concessions or require Micron to compete on cost in segments where it has not previously faced a third credible supplier with a structurally lower cost base. The threat is slower than the headlines and more real than the dismissals, and it accumulates in the module market before it ever surfaces in a name qualification announcement. The chip that matters in this contest is not the one that wins the press release. It is the one that quietly clears a module maker's sourcing meeting and asks no one at the brand level for permission. Which round scored wrong? If you have visibility into module tier sourcing practices at a named original equipment manufacturer or independent data on CXMT's production consistency across multiple lots, round 3's draw is the verdict most likely to need revision. Make the case in the comments with whatever specific evidence you can point to. If the supply chain forensics layer of this story is the part that interests you, subscribe and turn on notifications. The next video traces what happens to the cost calculus when double data rate 5 becomes the volume tier and CXMT's roadmap either closes the node gap or reveals where it stalls.